Hello and welcome to I Have Gnosis Tarot. My name is Ewan and today we are carrying on with our Thoth Tarot deck series, and we're going to have a little look at the court cards before we move on to the individual meanings and symbolism within each card. And we're doing this to just get a grasp really for every single court card. So this isn't just the court cards of the wands, we will be going through each of those after this little video. But this video is really here just so we get a general understanding of what is going on. Now, if you haven't seen the wands videos, they are the first set of videos I've done, and there is a whole playlist on my channel dedicated to those. We go through the from the Ace of Wands to the Ten of Wands, and as it is the first suit of the tarot deck, there's a lot of in-depth information in each of those videos regarding the numbers and why the cards have certain meanings, not just what the meanings are. Now, this video is going to be a companion video, essentially. Like I said, it's to help us understand what the court cards are. I thought I'd just put the wands court cards out on the table here because it's just it fits with the theme we're at the moment. And I did try and put all the court cards down at once, but firstly it was taking up most of the screen, and secondly it looked a bit jumbled, a bit too much going on. I don't want to overwhelm anyone because there's quite a bit of information to go through already. So what are the court cards in the tarot? Well, essentially if we think of the minor arcana, so the 1 to 10, as the Sephiroth in the Tree of Life of Kabbalah, and we can think of the major arcana as the paths between the Sephiroth. The court cards really are combinations of these Sephiroth, and essentially and not only combinations of the Sephiroth but also combinations of their suit and combinations of the alchemical elements. And these are essentially our personalities, and I think as we go through the court cards you will recognise these personalities in people you may know or even yourself. And I think something just to note there is, whilst we can say, for example, someone is generally a Queen of Wands, we do have all the court cards within us. This is the concept that actually personality is just a personality that we have chosen to make our primary one, and that actually the ego has many masks which it can turn through. And the reason for that is this is based upon the mind, and the mind is based upon the psyche, and the psyche is based upon consciousness. And as we know, if you've seen my videos so far, consciousness is everything. It is the universe. It is the tarot. That is what the tarot is. It is a map of consciousness, essentially. And I think even if you're not inclined towards the esoteric and spiritual side of the tarot, I think it still carries the same psychological messages, and certainly has a lot of use within psychology, even though I think most of psychology would be horrified to hear me say that. But I think they're essentially a bit like the Rorschach test that actually works. And like I say, as we go through these court cards, you are more than likely going to relate to each one, either in different moods that you're in, or people you know in your lives, even film characters, archetypes. I mean, these are more combinations of archetypes as opposed to the archetypes. They tend to be the major arcana, as in the archetypes, like the wise old man, for example. But these do contain aspects of the major and the minor arcana, so just like us, they're multifaceted beings. So I mentioned there the alchemical elements, and that's something that is often misunderstood, I think, when especially if you're coming from the secular point of view, looking into mysticism and esotericism and spirituality in general, is that there tends to be this kind of snobbery of, oh, these idiots think that there's only 4 elements when we've got the entire periodic table. Now, that might have been how our ancestors viewed it, but there wasn't this line between science and psychology, or science and spirituality, back before the Age of Enlightenment. And I think it's important to understand that modern spirituality does not fly in the face of science. It definitely acknowledges that the periodic table exists, and as we go into the Suit of Cups, and obviously later on when we get to the Universe Major Arcana, we'll see that the periodic table is actually referenced by the Thoth Tarot. The alchemical elements are more states of being. The wands being fire is essentially energy. Even that is a scientific thing that exists, and we can see fire as a metaphor, and that's really what the alchemical elements are. They're metaphors. Water is emotion. I think in a more modern sense we would say chemicals. And then we have air, which is thoughts, and this is because you can't see thoughts, but they're definitely there and they have a huge impact on our lives. And also, like air, they tend to be all over the place, hard to focus. And then finally we have earth, which is essentially material products. We could say matter, but one could also argue that matter is made up of energy and chemicals, so, well, chemicals are made up of energy. So I'd say the material product of these things. And I think something to understand with the alchemical elements is they're very embodied. I think you know what it feels like to be on fire, and I don't mean that literally. I think you know when you're in the flow of water state. I think you know when your head's full of air. And we all know what we mean when we say that we are grounded, which is essentially the earth element. And this is key to understanding the court cards, is this psychological understanding of the alchemical elements. So each court card of the tarot represents a combination of the concepts embodied by the minor arcana, just as we've said, the major arcana and the alchemical elements. And with regard to the alchemical elements, each court card is attributed to one of the four elements, and not just one of the four elements of their suit. So for example, the wands would be fire, and then they also have their own alchemical elements to create two alchemical elements. So I'll just go through these, the court cards of the wands, to understand this concept. So all knights are fire, and the wands are fire. So this means the Knight of Wands is the fire of fire. And I do think Lady Harris has beautifully captured this concept in this raging inferno of a gentleman on this black steed, holding the Ace of Wands. All queens are water. So here we have the water of fire, which is quite a difficult concept to get your head round in terms of taking it literally, but in terms of metaphor we might think of lava, flow, fire, or the way that fire tends to spread from one building to another in a firestorm. And all princes are air. So here we have the air of fire, and we can see this as an explosion. I think if you look at the card, there is this explosive element to all these shards. And if you don't believe this, you just have a tank of oxygen and put a flame, or should I say, set it on fire. I think you'll know what happens. And finally we have the Princess of Wands, well, the princesses. All princesses are earth. So here we have the earth of fire. This is very much like a lava. Sorry, I've said lava, not less lava. A volcano, I should say. Yeah, a volcano. But I think really the earth of fire is that fire within us, and that all princesses have this altar, which is meant to represent the flame of life. Just a note there, actually, with the different attributes, most knights hold their ace, because they are the first card of the court. All queens have a throne, which is essentially sitting on the ace in a sort of strange sort of kind of way. All princes have a chariot, which represents the mind and is the mobile version of the throne. And like I just said, all princesses have this altar of life that they protect. We'll go into a bit more detail about that when we come to the apocryphal tale of the court. So each of these court cards combines the elements of their suits with a specific psychological state or personality, and these all represent the conscious experience. So we all have a fire of fire within us, and some people tend to lean towards that more, and we see them express that as their personality. Psychologically, we can see these combinations in terms of things like hormones, energy, action, and ways of thinking. So I think a really good example of this I like to use, I'm going to bring him out just now if I can find him, the Knight of Cups. I'll just put him in the middle. So the Knight of Cups, you might see him on the box art of some of the Thoth Tarot decks, because I think it's one of the popular pieces of art. And he is the Fire of Water, which is, again, it seems another contradictory statement. But this is essentially the rushing of water, like a waterfall, and the energy of water as it carves through the land. Psychologically, you see, we may see this as the energy of emotion, and the rushing and infectious quality of both hormones and hormonal neurotransmitters. And we can equate these to passion and empathy, which are two big parts of the Knight of Wands, and essentially are the water and fire elements, or should I say fire and water elements in that order. So another very key aspect to the court cards is why they are in this particular order, running from the knight to the queen to the prince to the princess. And we're going to go into a bit of esoteric knowledge here, which is passed down from the Jewish Kabbalah into the Christian Kabbalah, and finally the esoteric Kabbalah. And these essentially represent, each court card represents one of the letters of Yahweh. Now, if you watched my Ace of Wands video, and I do highly recommend you go back and watch that, the word Yahweh in Hebrew essentially means to be, or to exist, or even both. To be, to exist. And we can really liken this to consciousness, and why consciousness is that thing that we call God. And this has another name, which is called the tetragrammaton. Tetra because there's 4 letters, and together they make up the 5th element, which is spirit, and that is of course the word Yahweh, consciousness, God, source, whatever you want to call it. It's essentially the same thing. Everything would also be a poignant title. So we have the knights, which are the first, the Yod of Yahweh. Of course, if I was spelling this in Hebrew, it would be backwards. And we have the He, the first He, that is, which is the Queen's. And we have the Wa, if that's how you pronounce it. And if there's anyone that speaks Hebrew, please do correct me in the comments. This is the Prince of Wands, and this the letter looks like a giant I, or should I say giant L. And then the final He is the Princess. Now each of these Hebrew letters has a meaning into itself. So Yod means hand, He means window, and the Wa is the hook. And also, in terms of archetypal figures, the wands represent the father. The knights represent the father, but so do the wands in fact as well, actually. The cups represent the mother, you see. The queen represents the mother as well as the cups. The princes and the swords represent the son, and the princesses and the discs, also known as pentacles, they represent the daughter. So we're going to look into the little myth here that explains the relationship between the court cards and thus the 4 elements that come together to make spirit or consciousness. And this myth is based off the archetypal tale of dynastic cycles. And this is something that we see a lot in mythology throughout the world, particularly Greek mythology, and why sometimes mythology can be quite incestuous. And it's because it's based off these more psychological concepts as opposed to real families. So you have parts of your mind mating with other parts as opposed to literal fathers and literal daughters and literal brothers marrying their literal sisters. And as we go through the tale, you'll see why when this gets a bit weird, and please do keep that in mind, that this is parts of your mind, not real people. So the knight in this tale, which is over here, and he is the king. And something to note is you may see kings in other tarot decks, but they are not the knight, and they are the prince, and the page is the princess. But we'll explain why the prince is the king as we go through the tale. So yes, the knight is the, in inverted commas, king, and he marries the queen, so this is the divine masculine and the divine feminine uniting, Shiva and Shakti, and together they give birth to the Prince of Wands, or the Suit of Swords, and the Princess of Wands, the Suit of Discs. To put it more bluntly, energy and chemicals give birth to thought and matter, and at the end I'll just touch on a very interesting connection here with modern epigenetics. So in this tale, the dynasty continues until the prince one day decides to usurp his father. And this is why he is the king card in other tarot decks. The prince carries the chariot of the mind, and his wife-to-be, which is weirdly his sister, is the princess, who carries the grail of her mother, which has the, or in this case it looks like an altar, but it's essentially the Holy Grail, which has the spark of life in it. Now, to make this less weird, we could say that the prince of one suit marries the princess of another suit. There isn't any law or any explanation whether that is the case. I suppose you could say headcanon. If you want to take it literally, we could say that, but again, this is thoughts, so if it gets weird, that's because your mind is weird. And what happens is, in this tale, is that when the prince becomes the king, he overthrows the knight and becomes the new king, and the princess becomes the queen, and the cycle continues. It just keeps going on and on and on, and this is the cycle of life and the cycle of thoughts in our minds. Now, whilst this is a somewhat outdated tale in terms of gender roles, the alchemical and elemental attributions still hold true. Again, as we said earlier, in this sense, the energy and emotions, also known as chemicals, create thought and matter. And if thoughts can attain the material product, the princess, they can invoke further energy and emotion, and we call this attachment. So when the prince marries the princess, when the thoughts combine with physical things, we create more energy and more emotion within ourselves, and this is how the prince usurps the king in real time. And this is interestingly something I discovered as I was studying this. I thought, this sounds familiar, this idea that thoughts and material products change our energy and our emotions, and how our energy and emotions change our thoughts, which is, we know happens, but also, and this is a really very interesting thing, our bodies. Now this is the massive segue I'm about to go on, and it's about epigenetics. So this tale that we've just told seems to play out in recent discoveries in epigenetics, whereby our thoughts can affect our nervous system and our hormones. And so this is essentially the prince usurping the kingdom here, and to such an extent that they transform our genes, and not as we used to think. We used to think that all genes took thousands, millions of years to change, and that tends to be the case with most genes, but with certain genes we've discovered that they can change within a lifetime, if not less. And this is essentially what is present in the Princess of Wands, our physical matter bodies. So thus, even in our biology, we can see that the maxim as above, so below, in terms of the fact that our minds can affect our nervous system, our emotions, and our genes. And of course, as we know, our nervous system, our emotions, and our genes can affect our mind. So that was a little bit of a scientific segue, but I do find it very interesting when we see this synchronicity between science and so-called spirituality. I don't know, I'm gradually becoming more comfortable with the term spirituality. I think it's because I'm a Capricorn. I just don't like the term, despite the fact that everything I tend to do these days tends to centre around it. I think metaphysics is the word I tend to use, but it's all basically the same jargon. So yeah, thank you for listening to this video or watching it, and I hope you understand a little bit more about the court cards. And of course, while we're going through the court cards, if you're confused at any point as to why these cards represent certain things, do come back to this video as a reference video, and I hope it will explain things a little better. When I record those videos, I will be pointing you back to this video at any point where I need to explain something regarding the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh. And when we get to the Major Arcana, this will also be very important too. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you are great, and I hope that you're having a peaceful life wherever you are in the world and at whatever time. And I will see you in the next video, where we'll be looking at the Knight of Wands, or of course, if you just stumbled across this video, whichever one you deem worthy of your time, in the playlist section. Thank you and goodbye.